£432,000. That was Hawkstone Brewery's paper value at the start of the year. By the end, it was £3 million. That is not a rumor, not a fan post. It is a company's house filing for the year ending 31 March 2025. And the real story is everything that happened around that number. Clarkson built that jump while the rest of the farm was still fighting a government restriction that had already outlived its original estimate, while his own land agent was telling him not to plant, and while his pub was getting hit by theft and scams. That is the part people miss, not just the brewery number, the year behind it. On 31st July 2025, Clarkson posted on X, "Bad news from Diddley Squad. We've gone down with TB. Everyone here is absolutely devastated." One of his cows had tested positive, and the consequence was simple. It was the law, not his choice. Once a cow fails the test, DEFRA takes over, and the herd goes into lockdown. At the time, he told Times Radio the process would take about 8 weeks. It did not. Months later, in an early 2026 Sunday Times column, he was still writing that they were still closed down with TB. That kind of delay turns a temporary problem into a real business drag. If you have ever watched one setback turn into 3, you know the feeling. It stops being an incident and starts becoming the year. A TB restriction like that does not pause the bills. Feed still has to be bought. Fuel still gets used. Labor still has to be paid. Land still costs money. The market does not care that a farm is under lockdown, and that was only one pressure point. In the same column, Clarkson explained why he was not properly planting spring barley and Durham wheat. Charlie Ireland, the land agent known on the show as Cheerful Charlie, told him there was no point. Not risky, not uncertain. A mathematical certainty of a loss. Clarkson said it himself. If he grew wheat in the UK this year, with energy, labor and tax costs where they are, he would be screwed. That is not bad farming. That is a brutal market. And if you are watching from outside agriculture, that is the part that matters. Most people assume farming fails because somebody makes a mistake. A lot of the time it fails because the numbers stop working. Prices were weak. Costs were high. The crop side was boxed in before the seed even went in. Then Clarkson added one more twist. He said he was comfortable hosting 25,000 to 3,000 farming professionals on that same land for cereals in June 2026. Even while admitting he was embarrassed because they would be talking farming on a farm where not much actual farming was happening. That line tells you everything. It is not a joke. It is a man describing a strange year, where the farm's public image kept moving while the land itself was under strain. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Plenty of businesses look busy while the real engine is somewhere else entirely. That is where Hawkstone comes in. The brewery, based in Bourton-on-the-Water, filed accounts for the same period. Total equity moved from £432,500 to just over £3 million. Current assets went from about £1.7 million to nearly £5 million. Stock rose to £1.9 million. Debtors climbed to £1.8 million. Cash in the bank jumped to £1.2 million. Staff numbers almost doubled, from 28 to 53. And according to a Sunday Times figure reported alongside those accounts, sales went from £7.8 million to £21.3 million. That is not a good year. That is a breakout year. Look at the contrast. The farm's crop side was being told the wheat and barley would lose money. The brewery built from that same barley was tripling sales and multiplying equity almost 7-fold. That should not line up so neatly. But it does. Sell barley as a commodity, and it sits inside a broken market. Turn it into beer, and the same raw material becomes a brand people actually buy. That is the trick. And it is a very Clarkson trick, because it turns an agricultural weakness into a commercial moat. The market that crushed the crop side is the market the brewery sidesteps. The timing makes it even sharper. Hawkstone was named the fastest growing private company in the Southwest and ranked 23rd nationally in the Sunday Times 100 list, up from 24th the year before. That happened while the farm itself was still carrying the TB restriction and the crop outlook was already written off. One part of the operation was absorbing the shock. The other was outrunning it. There is one important caveat here. Hawkstone does not file the most detailed accounts because it falls under the small company threshold. So we cannot tell you the exact profit inside each pint. We can, however, see the direction clearly. And the direction is very loud. The rest of the business had its own blows too. Clarkson later said the farmer's dog had been hacked and swindled out of £27,000. In the same column, he described customers allegedly trying to claim £5,000 through fake food intolerance complaints. 2 hits, 1 pub, 1 month. That would rattle most operators. Instead, the pub kept trading. And if you have ever owned something small, you know how much that matters. It is one thing to survive the first hit. It is another to survive the second and still open the doors the next morning. The farm shop had its own ugly stretch too. Storm Dara forced it to close in December 2024, and it stayed shut through January and February before reopening on the 1st March. Roughly 3 months with no farm shop revenue. Again, not a clean year. A stack of pressure, one on top of another. Then came the planning fight. West Oxfordshire District Council had already blocked Clarkson's original plans for a car park, restaurant, and access road. The restaurant he built in a converted barn was forced to close under enforcement action. That fight is widely seen as part of the reason national planning rules were later loosened in a change people now call Clarkson's Clause. He later won an appeal in 2023 to keep a temporary version running, but only on the condition that the land would be restored within 3 years. That deadline is now close. As of 5 July 2026, the Highways Authority had backed his bid to keep the car park in place until 2030. The council still has to make its final decision, but the momentum is with him. That is classic Clarkson again. Blocked, then adapted. Pressured, then still standing. So where does that leave the story? A TB restriction that lasted far longer than first promised. A crop year that Clarkson himself says was a guaranteed loss. A pub that took 2 separate financial hits and kept going. A farm shop that lost 3 months to storm damage. A planning battle still not fully over. And in the middle of all that, a brewery that turned £42,000 into £3 million, tripled sales, and almost doubled staff in the same 12 months. That is not luck. That is structure. The farm side was under strain. The beer side was scaling. The same raw material that lost money as grain became the engine of a fast-growing business. That is the real story, and it is still not finished. The next accounts have not landed. The council has not ruled on the car park extension. There has been no public TB update since that early 2026 column. So the question now is simple. Do we check the next Hawkstone filing, the car park decision, or the strange Yorkshire registration nobody has explained properly yet?